Everyone believes a peace meeting is where violence pauses, where rules still matter, where no one dares to cross certain lines. That's exactly why it was the most dangerous place of all. On that night, when men gathered under the pretense of ending bloodshed, someone made a decision that would erase every remaining rule and turn restraint into open war. Because during that meeting they tried to kill Lucky Luciano. There was no warning shot, no challenge issued, just an attempt to erase a man in the one space where erasing anyone was forbidden. In the Mafia world, peace meetings are sacred not because men trust each other, but because everyone understands the alternative. Violence inside peace destroys the last barrier holding the system together. Once that barrier falls, nothing contains what comes next. Luciano survived the attempt. But survival wasn't the real outcome. The real damage happened the moment the attack was made. Because it wasn't just an assassination attempt, it was a declaration that peace itself could be weaponized, that trust could be exploited, that even the last neutral ground could be turned into a killing floor. From that second on, the question was no longer whether there would be war. The only question was how fast it would spread and how brutal it would become. Luciano didn't need to call for retaliation. He didn't need to issue threats. The act itself had already done that. It told every family in New York the same thing. If peace meetings aren't safe, then nothing is. That night didn't end negotiations. It ended the idea that negotiation could protect anyone, and once that belief died, the war didn't need permission to begin. Peace meetings in the Mafia world aren't built on trust. They're built on fear of what happens when trust collapses. Everyone in that room understood this, especially Lucky Luciano. The purpose of the meeting wasn't friendship, compromise, or forgiveness. It was containment, a controlled space where tension could be released without blood, because blood, once spilled there, would make every future negotiation impossible. That's why these meetings followed unspoken but absolute rules. No weapons drawn, no ambushes, no sudden moves. Not because men were honorable, but because breaking those rules carried a cost far greater than any short-term gain. A killing during peace didn't just remove a rival, it removed the system that prevented endless retaliation. Everyone knew this. Which is why the meeting mattered more than the outcome it was supposed to produce. Luciano understood that if this gathering ended cleanly, it would reassert a fragile balance. Grievances could remain unresolved but contained. Power could be redistributed slowly without explosions. But if violence entered that room, it wouldn't stay there. It would follow every man home, infect every alliance, and turn every future meeting into a potential trap. That's what made the decision to attack during peace so reckless and so final. It wasn't a gamble on killing Luciano. It was a gamble on whether the Mafia system itself could survive being openly betrayed. And Luciano knew the answer immediately. Once the rules are violated in the one place designed to prevent chaos, restraint becomes weakness. Silence becomes permission. From that moment on, no agreement could be trusted, no neutral ground could exist, and no delay could stop what was coming next. The meeting had to stay clean because it was the last line between tension and total war. The instant someone crossed that line, the meeting stopped being about peace. It became the point of no return. What made the attempt so destabilizing wasn't how it was carried out, but where it was carried out. An assassination during a peace meeting isn't just violence. It's a rejection of the entire framework that keeps violence limited. When they moved against Lucky Luciano in that room, they weren't choosing a target. They were choosing to erase the last boundary everyone depended on. The logic behind the attempt was dangerously flawed. Whoever approved it believed they could have both outcomes at once. Remove Luciano and preserve the appearance of peace. They assumed that if the killing was quick enough, clean enough, deniable enough, the meeting could still be framed as a failure of circumstance rather than a betrayal of rules. In other words, they believed violence could be hidden inside diplomacy without destroying diplomacy itself. That belief was a miscalculation of the highest order. In the Mafia world, perception matters more than proof. It didn't matter whether everyone knew exactly who ordered the hit. What mattered was that it happened there, in that space, under that pretense. The moment the attempt was made, every man present understood the same thing instantly. If this could happen during peace, then peace had lost all meaning. Luciano didn't need to be killed for the damage to be irreversible. The attempt alone was enough. It confirmed that agreements were no longer binding, that safety was conditional, and that patience would now be punished rather than rewarded. The message was brutal in its simplicity. Waiting for talks made you vulnerable, and that realization spread faster than any gunman ever could. Men who had arrived expecting negotiation left recalculating survival. Alliances that had been flexible hardened overnight. Neutral parties stopped believing neutrality existed. The assassination attempt didn't fail because it missed its target. It failed because it achieved the worst possible result. It convinced everyone that restraint was obsolete. That's why this wasn't just an attack on Luciano. It was an attack on the concept of delay, mediation, and control. And once those concepts died in that room, something far more dangerous took their place. Because after that moment, the next act of violence wouldn't be debated. It would be assumed. In the Mafia world, rules aren't written down, but they're absolute. And the most important one had just been shattered. Violence during peace isn't treated like violence anywhere else. It isn't personal. It isn't situational. It's systemic. When the attempt on Lucky Luciano happened inside a meeting meant to prevent bloodshed, it didn't just target a man. It invalidated the only mechanism that kept conflicts from becoming endless. Luciano understood this immediately. If he treated the attempt as a normal assassination, he would reduce it to a private dispute, and that would be catastrophic, because doing so would signal that breaking the rules of peace carried no unique consequence, that future meetings could still function, that restraint was still rational. None of that could be allowed to stand. In this world, rules survive only if violations are treated as existential threats. Once violence enters peace, every agreement becomes a lie, every delay becomes a trap, and every attempt at mediation becomes an invitation to be killed. Luciano didn't see an enemy who had overreached. He saw a system that had been publicly declared obsolete. And systems, once declared obsolete, don't recover. That's why silence after the attempt wasn't hesitation. It was recognition. Recognition that if Luciano absorbed this and moved on, he would teach everyone the wrong lesson. That peace meetings were optional, that betrayal carried no structural cost, and that patience was weakness. The rule had been broken in the only place it couldn't be repaired. From that moment forward, the logic of restraint collapsed. Men stopped asking whether violence was justified and started asking whether delay was survivable. And once that question changes, the outcome is inevitable. War doesn't begin because people want it. It begins because the alternative stops making sense. The attempt during peace didn't just cross a line, it erased it. And Luciano knew that restoring order would no longer be possible through negotiation, only through consequence. The war didn't begin with anger. It began with agreement. By the time the night ended, every major player in New York had reached the same conclusion independently, without coordination, without orders. If a peace meeting could be violated, then peace itself no longer existed. And once that truth settled in, hesitation became the most dangerous move of all. Lucky Luciano didn't need to declare anything. He didn't need to rally allies or point fingers. The attempt on his life had already done the work for him. It stripped the system of its last safety valve. From that moment forward, restraint stopped being a virtue and started being a liability. Any man who waited risked being the next one tested, during talks, during mediation, during moments that used to mean safety. That night, behavior changed everywhere, quietly and immediately. Meetings weren't postponed, they were abandoned. Messages weren't softened, they were shortened. Crews didn't ask for clarification, they prepared. No one trusted invitations anymore. No one believed in neutral ground. The assumption shifted from "we can still talk to someone" is already moving. This is the moment that made the war unavoidable, not because Luciano demanded retaliation, but because the environment no longer allowed delay. Once peace was proven to be a trap, every future attempt at negotiation looked like exposure. Waiting wasn't patience anymore. It was vulnerability. And vulnerability, in this world, invites elimination. Luciano understood this better than anyone. Trying to restore calm after a betrayal like that wouldn't preserve order. It would reward the violation. It would teach everyone that rules could be broken without systemic consequence, that peace could be exploited, and that was more dangerous than open conflict. War, at least, was honest. So Luciano didn't rush to contain what followed. He didn't try to slow it down or reframe it. He let the logic of the moment play out. Once the line was crossed, the system corrected itself the only way it knew how, by removing ambiguity through force. The critical shift happened right there, that same night. Violence was no longer a choice, it was an assumption. Every move after that was defensive by default, even when it looked aggressive. The war didn't need a starting shot because psychologically it had already begun. That's why this moment mattered more than the attack itself. The assassination attempt didn't just fail to kill Luciano. It succeeded in killing the idea that peace could protect anyone. And once that idea died, the war didn't need to be announced. It was already in motion. Once the line was crossed, stopping the war became impossible. Not because people wanted blood, but because no one trusted restraint anymore. That's the part most outsiders miss. Wars don't continue because of hatred. They continue because the system that once limited violence has lost credibility. And after what happened during that peace meeting, credibility was gone. For Lucky Luciano, the danger wasn't escalation. The real danger was reversal. If he attempted to pause the conflict, to pull things back toward negotiation, he wouldn't look responsible, he would look complicit. Complicit in proving that peace meetings could be violated without consequence. Complicit in telling every other boss that patience would only get them exposed. No one else could step in either. There were no neutral brokers left. Anyone offering mediation now looked suspicious. If peace could be used as cover for an assassination attempt once, it could be used again. Every invitation to talk became a potential setup. Every delay felt like someone else buying time to move first. Under those conditions, even men who hated the idea of war found themselves preparing for it. This is why the conflict accelerated so fast after that night. Not because Luciano ordered a campaign, but because the environment punished hesitation. Crews moved preemptively. Alliances hardened into blocks. Silence was interpreted as plotting. And once that logic takes over, stopping violence requires more trust than anyone can afford to give. Luciano understood that trying to halt the momentum would only prolong the instability. A slow war is worse than a fast one. It creates paranoia without resolution. By allowing events to unfold, he let the system reestablish new rules through action rather than promises. Brutal rules, but rules that couldn't be exploited the way peace had been. That's the final irony. The assassination attempt during peace was meant to shortcut a conflict. Instead, it guaranteed one. Not because Luciano demanded it, but because everyone else concluded the same thing on their own. If peace can't protect you, only force can. After that night, the war wasn't driven by orders. It was driven by inevitability. The most important moment in this story wasn't the attempt on Lucky Luciano's life. It was the realization that followed it. The understanding that peace, once violated, can never be trusted again. When violence enters the one space meant to prevent it, the damage can't be negotiated away. It spreads. It hardens positions. It turns hesitation into risk. Luciano didn't start the war that night, but he understood something crucial the moment the attempt failed. Pretending the rules still worked would only make things worse. Peace meetings exist to delay violence. Once delay becomes dangerous, the system flips. Survival demands clarity, not compromise. That's why what followed wasn't chaos. It was inevitability. Everyone adjusted at the same time, without coordination, without instruction. The war didn't need to be announced because it had already been accepted as the only remaining language that couldn't be exploited. In a world where even peace can be used as a trap, force becomes the last honest option. This is the uncomfortable truth behind many conflicts, criminal or otherwise. Wars don't always begin because someone wants them. They begin because trust collapses in the one place it was supposed to be protected. And once that happens, restraint stops looking noble. It starts looking suicidal. That night proved one thing beyond doubt. When peace is turned into a weapon, war doesn't need a reason to start. It only needs permission to continue.